I'd like to talk about the IUCN Red List and a couple of other things. The IUCN Red List is a standardized way to categorize species as either extinct, threatened, or lower risk. And in fact, in each of these three major categories, there are subcategories. And to categorize a species, they use quantitative criteria. They are using specific criteria. And this list is used globally by conservationists, by conservation photographers, by government agencies. There's a lot of good information in this list, and I encourage you to look at the website that has the IUCN Red List. So anyway, the IUCN categories, again, extinct, threatened, or lower risk. There's two I'm not going to talk about. One is data deficient, which means they don't have enough data on the species to put it in any of these three categories. Or their species is not evaluated. And there's a number of species that haven't been evaluated. And so there's no idea where they would occur on the list. So the first category I want to talk about is extinct. And there's two subcategories. The species may be either extinct or extinct in the wild. And if a species is extinct, it's gone forever. It no longer exists on the planet. We've seen examples of that. The passenger pigeon is extinct. The Carolina parakeet is extinct. However, a species can be extinct in the wild but still exist in captivity. And in fact, a lot of species that are extinct in the wild and are in captivity, they're actually in captive breeding programs with the hopes of reintroducing them back into the wild at some point. And that is what's happening with the Sphinx's macaw. This is a macaw, a beautiful blue macaw that once existed in the wild in Brazil. And now there is no individuals in the wild, but it does exist in captivity, and they're doing a captive breeding program with hopes of introducing it back in the wild. And then the Scimitar horned oryx. This oryx is native to North Africa, and it went extinct because of hunting. It still exists in zoos, but it no longer exists in the wild. The next category is threatened, and there is three threatened categories: critically endangered, endangered, or vulnerable. If a species is listed as critically endangered, it's facing it's facing an extremely high risk of extinction in the wild in the immediate future. And this is a table of criteria that would define a species as being critically endangered. If there was an observable reduction in the number of individuals, i.e. the population declined by 80% or more in the last 10 years or 3 generations. I'm not going to read you all this, but the point of showing you this table is to show you that there are consistent and quantitative criteria to determine the status of a species put in a particular category. The black rhino is an example of a critically endangered species. Critically endangered primarily due to poaching. There's a high demand for rhino horn in illegal wildlife trade. And so notice that this black rhino that I photographed in Namibia was dehorned. The horns were removed to hopefully discourage poachers from taking this animal. So the threatened category includes critically endangered. It also includes endangered and vulnerable. If a taxon is endangered, it's not critically endangered, but it's facing a high risk of extinction in the wild in the near future. Vulnerable, it's not critically endangered or endangered, but is facing a high risk of extinction in the medium-term future. An example of a species listed as endangered would be the black-footed ferret. We talked about that, having a species having specialized feeding habits. An example of a species being vulnerable is listed as vulnerable is the giraffe. And this listing is recent. It was moved from a species of least concern to vulnerable in 2016. What's leading to this is habitat loss, civil unrest, illegal hunting, and then ecological changes in Africa. And so these combination of threats have caused the population to decline 36 to 40% in the last 30 years. And so giraffes recently have been listed as vulnerable to extinction. The last category I want to talk about on the IUCN Red List is the category of lower risk. And it includes two subcategories. It includes near threatened and it includes least concern. In the near threatened category, the near threatened category includes taxa that do not qualify for conservation dependent, but are close to qualifying for being vulnerable. And some examples of that are the maned wolf from the Cerrado of Brazil, the jaguar from the Pantanal and Cerrado of Brazil, and then the ringed lemur from Madagascar. Also under the lower risk category would be those of least concern. This category includes species that can be fairly abundant. For example, the mule deer and the bald eagle. Okay. And so species of least concern are doing pretty well. They're abundant and they're widespread.